She burned the letter in her hands, the one that promised he'd come back, and said nothing. Just let the paper curl and blacken in the summer heat while strangers walked past her like she was part of the bench she sat on. 3 days. No food, no name, no one. If you've ever felt invisible in a crowd of people who should have loved you, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow every part to the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The bench had been there longer than the station. That was what the old station master used to say back when he still cared enough to say anything. The bench was older than the tracks, older than the town, older than the painted sign above the depot doors that now read Caldwell Crossing, in letters so faded you had to already know what they said to read them. Evelyn Harper had been sitting on that bench for 3 days. She knew it was 3 days because she had counted the sunrises. Not on purpose. There was nothing else to count. The first morning she told herself someone was coming. The second morning she stopped telling herself anything. The third morning she didn't open her eyes until the heat forced her to. She was 34 years old. She had 11 cents in her coat pocket, a carpet bag with a broken latch, and a letter she could no longer read because her hands had crumpled it so many times that the ink had worn away in the creases. She knew what it said. She didn't need to read it anymore. By the time you find this, I'll already be gone. Don't come looking. You were never supposed to be my forever. Those were the words she had memorized the way you memorize a scar. Not because you want to, because it's just there every time you look. His name had been Thomas Hale. He had a house in Denver and a smile that made you believe in things you had no business believing in. He had promised her a life. He had sent her the train ticket. Himself had tucked it into an envelope with her name written in his handwriting, the only handwriting she'd ever seen that curved at the edges like it was trying to be gentle. She'd sold everything. Her mother's dishes, her father's watch, the little plot of land her uncle had left her in Tennessee that wasn't worth much but was worth something. She'd arrived at Caldwell Crossing on a Tuesday. He hadn't been there. She'd waited. Then she'd opened the bag he'd left with the station boy, found the letter, and sat down on the bench, and didn't get up. The sheriff walked past her on the second day. He was a thick man with a dust-colored mustache and the kind of eyes that had gotten very good at deciding who mattered and who didn't. He slowed when he saw her. She looked up. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who had already made his decision before he stopped. "You waiting on something, miss?" "A train," she said. Her voice surprised her. Dry, flat, like it belonged to someone else. "Next one's not till Friday." "I know." He studied her a moment longer. The broken carpet bag, the wilted dress, the way she was sitting not like someone resting, but like someone who had simply run out of reasons to move. "You got somewhere to be?" he asked. "No." "Family in town?" "No." "Money for a room?" She didn't answer, which was an answer. He pulled at his mustache, shifted his weight, looked down the street, and then back at her, and she could see the moment he made his peace with it, the small internal shrug that people do when they've decided that a problem isn't theirs to solve. "Well," he said, "can't have you sleeping on county property indefinitely." "I'm not sleeping," she said. He left. The heat in Caldwell Crossing in July was not polite heat. It didn't build slowly or warn you. It was just there, immediate and total, like the sun had decided that morning to make a point. By the third afternoon, Evelyn had stopped feeling it. That was the part that frightened her somewhere in the back of her mind, where she still had the energy to be frightened. When the body stops registering pain, it isn't peace. It's something else entirely. She had eaten the last of her food on the first night, 2 biscuits she'd wrapped in a handkerchief before leaving Tennessee. Not because she'd thought she'd need them, but because her mother had always said, "You don't travel without something in your hand." She'd eaten them slowly, the way you eat something when you don't know when the next thing is coming. There hadn't been a next thing. She'd had water from the pump behind the station on the second morning. It had tasted like rust and heat and something vaguely wrong. She'd drunk it anyway. A woman had passed on the boardwalk earlier that afternoon, well-dressed, a hat with a blue ribbon, and had paused long enough to look at Evelyn with an expression that was worse than pity. It was the look of someone confirming a suspicion. Yes. There it is. That kind of woman. Evelyn had held her gaze until the woman looked away first. It was the only thing she'd won in 3 days. She didn't hear him coming. That was the first thing. She had been watching a fly navigate the edge of her carpet bag with the focused attention of someone who has run out of anything else to focus on, and then there was a shadow across her shoes, and she became aware that someone was standing in front of her. She looked up slowly. He wasn't what she expected. She hadn't expected anything she had stopped expecting, but if she had, it wouldn't have been this. A man somewhere in his late 30s or early 40s, it was hard to say. Hat pulled low against the sun, canvas work coat despite the heat. A face that had been outdoors for so long that the sun had burned any softness away and left something harder underneath. Not cruel, just removed. Like a man who had gotten very careful about how much of himself he let show. He was looking at her the way you look at something that doesn't quite fit the pattern of everything around it. Not with pity, not with judgment, with assessment. "You've been on this bench 3 days," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said anyway. "You sick?" "No." "Hurt?" "No." He looked at her carpet bag, at her hands, at the crumpled letter she hadn't realized she was still holding. "Waiting on someone?" he asked. "Not anymore." Something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly. More like the slight adjustment a man makes when the information he receives changes the calculation he's running. "You got money for the hotel?" "No." "Food?" "No." "Anyone in this town know you?" "The sheriff," she said. "He told me not to sleep on county property." For a moment she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Something quick and ungentle. "That sounds about right," he said, quiet and even. He was quiet for a stretch, the kind of quiet that had weight to it. She waited to see if he would do what every other person in Caldwell Crossing had done, make his decision, make his peace with it, and walk on. He didn't walk on. "I'm going to say something," he said, "and you don't have to listen to it." She didn't respond, which he seemed to take as permission. "My name is Jack Callahan. I run a ranch about 7 miles out. I came into town to buy grain. I'm going back this afternoon." He paused. "I'm not a man who makes speeches, so I'm only going to say this once. You can come with me and work honest work, fair wages, a room that's got a roof. Or you can stay here and wait for a train that's not coming until Friday to take you God knows where with 11 cents in your pocket." He glanced at her coat. "Don't ask me how I know that. I've been around enough people who've hit the bottom to recognize the look." Evelyn stared at him. In another life, the life she'd had in Tennessee before Thomas Hale's letter, before his handwriting that curved at the edges, she might have had something sharp to say about that. Some self-respecting refusal. Some defense of her dignity. But dignity, she had learned in the last 3 days, was a luxury that required a certain minimum of calories to sustain. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Why what?" "Why would you do that?" she said. "You don't know me. You don't know what I did or didn't do, or why I'm sitting here. You don't know if I'm trustworthy or honest or worth the trouble." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I don't." "Then why?" He reached up and adjusted the brim of his hat. A slow, deliberate gesture. "Because 3 days ago, you sat down on that bench," he said, "and not one person in this town asked you if you needed anything. Not one." He glanced down the street at the sheriff's office, at the boardwalk, at the town that had looked right through her. "I reckon that tells me more about this town than it tells me anything about you." Evelyn looked at him for a long time. He met her gaze without apology and without performance. Just a straight, steady look that said, "I've said what I have to say. The rest is up to you." She stood up. Her legs were unsteady. She hadn't stood in hours, had lost track of how long, and she gripped the edge of the bench to keep from stumbling. She saw his hand come up slightly, not reaching for her just present. Ready. In case. She steadied herself without taking it. "I'm not a charity case," she said. "I didn't say you were," he said. "I said I needed someone to work." "What kind of work?" "Cooking, mending, whatever needs doing. The ranch has been running short-handed since winter." "I've never worked a ranch." "Most of what needs doing, you don't need to have ranch to do." She picked up her carpet bag. The broken latch swung open, and she caught it, pressed it shut, held it with her hand. "If I find out you're lying," she said, "about the wages, about the room, about any of it, I'll leave." "That's your right," he said. "And I don't need protecting. I need fair treatment. That's all I'm offering," he said. She studied him one more second. Then she said, "All right, Mr. Callahan." He nodded, just once. "Wagons down the street," he said. "Take your time." He didn't wait for her. He turned and walked at an easy pace, not looking back to see if she followed. She followed. The wagon ride took nearly 2 hours. He didn't try to fill the silence. She had expected him to expected the questions, the version of helpfulness that was really just interrogation dressed up in sympathy. "Where are you from? What happened? Why were you at that station? Who left you there?" He didn't ask any of it. He drove. She sat on the wagon bench beside him with her carpet bag balanced across her knees and watched the landscape open up around them, the flat gold of the summer grasses, the hard blue of the sky, the mountains in the far distance that looked like a pencil sketch someone had left unfinished. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. She was aware of it in the distant way. You're aware of a wound when the shock hasn't worn off yet, not fully feeling it, but knowing it was there, knowing she'd feel it later. About an hour into the ride, he reached into a saddlebag behind the seat and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle without looking at her. Set it on the bench between them. "Eat that," he said. She looked at it. "Mr. Callahan." "It's just biscuits," he said. "From the baker in town. I was going to eat them on the drive back. I had breakfast." He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "You didn't." She looked at the bundle for a moment. Then she picked it up and unwrapped it. 3 biscuits, still warm. She made herself take a small, even bite, made herself eat like a person, and not like someone at the end of something, and the warmth of it hit her stomach, and she closed her eyes for just a moment. "Thank you," she said. He said. Which seemed to be the end of it. She ate 2 of the biscuits and rewrapped the 3rd. "Eat it," he said. "I'm done," she said. "Miss Harper," he said, and the fact that he knew her name, she hadn't told him her name, sent a small jolt through her. "You don't eat enough, you won't be able to work. And I told you there was work, so eat the biscuit." She looked at him. "How do you know my name?" Station master mentioned a woman who'd been waiting, gave a description and a name, said she was waiting on a man from Denver. A pause. "Man from Denver didn't show." "No," she said. "He didn't." "His loss," he said flatly, without sentiment, without a trace of the cloying comfort that people usually attach to words like that. Just a statement, plain and even. His loss. She ate the 3rd biscuit. Tag. The ranch appeared without announcement. One moment, there was just the trail and the grass and the heat shimmer on the horizon, and then a turn, and there it was. Not grand, not the kind of spread that men bragged about in saloons. A main house wood gone silver gray from seasons of weather. A barn that leaned slightly, but was clearly structurally intentional about it. A split-rail fence that had been repaired in places with newer wood that hadn't yet aged to match. A pump near the house. A garden plot at the side. She took it in. "It's not much to look at," he said. "It's standing," she said. Something in him seemed to accept that as a fair answer. He pulled the wagon up to the front and climbed down, then began unloading grain sacks from the wagon bed without asking for help. She climbed down on her own side, took her carpet bag, and stood in the yard for a moment. It was quieter out here than in town. Not the silence of absence, not the silence of being ignored, but a different kind. Crickets in the grass. A horse in the barn making a low sound. Wind moving through something it couldn't quite name. She realized, standing there, that she hadn't heard real quiet in 3 days. She had been sitting in the middle of a town that had kept going around her like she was a stone in a stream, and the noise of it had been constant horses. Voices, the occasional train whistle, the laughter from the saloon 2 blocks over, and none of it had been for her, or about her, or aware of her, and somehow that had made the noise worse than silence. This was different. "Room's in the back of the house," he said, not looking up from the grain sacks. "Second door on the left, clean. There's a basin and a pitcher." He paused. "There's food in the kitchen. Help yourself to whatever's there. I'll be in after I stable the horse." She started toward the house. "Miss Harper?" She stopped. She turned. He was looking at her now, straight on the way he had at the station. That steady, unremarkable, completely serious look. "You said you'd leave if I wasn't being straight with you," he said. "I did," she said. "I'm going to be straight with you about one thing now before you go in." She waited. "This ranch hasn't had a woman in it in 4 years," he said. "I'm not easy to live alongside. I don't talk much, and I don't explain myself much, and I've got my ways of doing things that I'm set in." A pause. "I'm telling you that now not to apologize for it, but so you know what you're walking into." Evelyn looked at him. 4 years. She thought about the gray wood and the slightly leaning barn and the new wood in the old fence. She thought about a man who drove 7 miles into town for grain and drove back in silence and somehow found it in himself to put biscuits on a bench between them without making a production of it. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "I just spent 3 days sitting on a bench while a whole town pretended I wasn't there." She held his gaze. "I'll take quiet over that any day of the week." He held her gaze another moment. Then he turned back to the grain sacks. She walked into the house. The room was clean. That was the first thing she noticed, and it mattered more than she expected it to. Clean and small and plain. A narrow bed, a wooden chair, a shelf, the basin and pitcher he'd mentioned, but genuinely clean. Not neglected and swept once for the occasion. The wood of the floor was worn but scrubbed. The curtain over the small window was plain cotton but unstained. Someone had cared about this room once. She set her carpet bag on the chair, opened it, looked at what she had left: a change of dress, a comb, a small Bible her mother had pressed into her hands at the train station in Tennessee, with the particular urgency of someone who suspects a goodbye might be longer than it seems. She hadn't opened the Bible in 3 days. She poured water from the pitcher into the basin, washed her face, washed her hands, looked at herself in the small mirror above the shelf. She had expected to look worse. She looked emptied, like a house after everyone's moved out. All the right features in the right places, but something essential gone quiet behind them. She straightened up, tucked her hair, pressed her hands flat against the front of her dress until they steadied. Then she went to find the kitchen. She had cooked supper before he came inside. She didn't ask. She found the kitchen orderly, practical, the kind of kitchen kept by someone who cooked to eat, and not for any other reason, and found eggs and salt pork and dried beans and cornmeal, and made what she could make. She had the plates on the table when he came through the door, hands clean, and hat hung on the peg by the door, and he stopped for a moment at the threshold of the kitchen. She saw him register the table, the food, the fact that it had been done without being asked. "Sit down," she said. "It's ready." He sat down. They ate in silence. It was not an uncomfortable silence. That surprised her. She had expected something strained, the silence of 2 strangers working out what to do with each other, the silence of obligation and awkwardness. Instead, It was just quiet. Food eaten. A meal shared. Nothing required beyond that. When they were done, she cleared the plates. He said without looking up from the table, "It was good." "It was what I could find," she said. "I know," he said. "That's what made it good." She stopped at the edge of the kitchen and looked at him. He was looking at the table. A man comfortable in his own thinking, it seemed. Not lonely, just inward. "Mr. Callahan," she said. He looked up. "Why did you really stop at that bench?" He was quiet for a moment. "I told you why," he said. "You told me a reason," she said. "I asked why." He studied her. "I drove past you on Tuesday," he said at last. "On my way into town. You were already there." He paused. "I told myself it wasn't my business. Drove on. Did what I needed to do." Another pause. "Drove back out. You were still there." He looked at his hands on the table. "I told myself it still wasn't my business. Drove on again." Evelyn waited. "This morning I came back in for the grain," he said, "and you were still there." He was quiet for a long moment. 3 days, and not one person in that town. He stopped, seemed to decide something. "My mother died in a railroad town in Texas in 1871, he said, waiting for a train that was delayed. Nobody helped her. She was a woman alone in a station waiting room for 2 days, and not one person asked her if she needed anything." He looked up. "She died of heat stroke on the second afternoon. The train arrived the next morning. The kitchen was very still." "I'm sorry," Evelyn said. "I'm not telling you for sympathy," he said. "I'm telling you so you know I drive past women sitting alone on benches for 3 days because I'm slow, not because I don't see." He held her gaze. "I see." She stood there for a moment in the doorway of his kitchen in a ranch she'd never heard of 24 hours ago, and something in her chest did something she couldn't quite name. Not hope, not yet. She was too tired for hope, but something adjacent to it. Something small and stubborn that had survived 3 days on a bench, and 2 biscuits, and the look on that woman's face with the blue-ribboned hat. "Good night, Mr. Callahan," she said. "Good night, Miss Harper," he said. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of the clean bed in the quiet house and listened to the sounds of a ranch settling into evening, the horses, the wind, the distant cry of something she couldn't name. And for the first time in 3 days, she didn't count the hours until morning. She just let them pass. She was up before the sun. Old habit, Tennessee habit. Her mother had always said that the first one awake owned the day, and even though the woman who taught her that was 3 states away and probably didn't know where her daughter had ended up, Evelyn was not in the habit of wasting the only inheritance she had left. She dressed in the dark, found the kitchen by memory, started the fire in the stove with the wood stacked beside it, and by the time the light outside the window had shifted from black to the particular gray-blue of early summer morning, she had coffee on and was working through what was left in the larder. She heard him before she saw him, boots on the wood floor, deliberate and unhurried, and then he was in the doorway of the kitchen, and he stopped when he saw her. "You don't start until after breakfast," he said. "This is how I start breakfast," she said without turning around. A pause. "Coffee's ready?" she said. She heard him move to the table, heard the chair, heard the particular silence of a man who had been living alone long enough that another person in his kitchen was something he had to recalibrate to. She poured 2 cups and set one in front of him, and sat across the table with the other. He looked at the cup, then he looked at her. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," she said. "You told me cooking was part of the work." "I meant lunch and supper." "Well," she said, "now it means breakfast too." He looked at her for a moment with that same level assessment. She was starting to recognize the look of a man who was deciding something quietly without announcing it. Then he picked up the coffee and drank. She took that as settled. They ate without ceremony eggs she'd scrambled with salt pork cornbread from last night's leftover batter, and when he pushed back from the table, he said plainly, "You cook better than I do." "Most people do," she said. Something almost moved at the corner of his mouth. Almost. He stood, put his hat on, and said, "I'll be at the fence line on the south end. There's mending needs doing on the east side of the barn. Thread and needles in the box on the shelf in the hall. Saddle blankets." "All right," she said. He was already at the door. "Mr. Callahan?" He stopped. "What time do you come in for lunch?" "Noon," he said. "Give or take." "Give or take how much?" "Depends on the fence." She looked at him. "That is genuinely not helpful." He paused for just a beat too long. 1 o'clock at the latest, he said. And then he was gone. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the kitchen with her coffee going cool in her hands, and she thought about the fact that 12 hours ago she had been sitting on a bench waiting for a train that wasn't coming, and now she was sitting at a table in a stranger's kitchen, planning the noon meal. Life, she had come to understand, was not gradual. It was all at once or nothing. She got up and started the dishes. The saddle blankets were in worse shape than she'd expected. 3 of them had seams split wide enough to catch a stirrup, and one had a tear that suggested something had gotten its teeth into it at some point. She worked through the morning at the table in the hall, needle pulling through heavy canvas and the repetition of it. The rhythm of hands doing something useful was more steadying than she'd anticipated. She hadn't had her hands doing something useful in 3 days. She hadn't realized how much of her was located in her hands until they'd had nothing to do. She was halfway through the second blanket when she heard it. A horse coming in fast, too fast for a normal return, and then the sound of boots hitting the ground hard, and the door opening with more force than Jack Callahan had used on it this morning. She was on her feet before she thought about it. He came around the corner into the hall and stopped when he saw her already standing. "There's a calf down in the south pasture," he said. His voice was level, but she could hear the urgency underneath it, the thing men like him tried to keep out of their voices and usually succeeded at until they didn't. "Stuck in a ditch. Can't get it out on my own." She put down the blanket. "What do you need?" she said. He looked at her for a fraction of a second, not surprise exactly, but something close to reassessment. "Come with me," he said. She followed him out. The calf was small and terrified, and had managed to wedge itself into a ditch with the particular genius of young animals for getting themselves into positions they cannot get out of. It was crying in a way that was less like an animal sound, and more like something that simply had not been alive long enough to be quiet about pain. The mother was nearby, circling, lowing low and anxious. "I need you to hold its head," Jack said. "Keep it from twisting. If it panics while I'm pulling, it'll hurt itself worse." Me, or so. Evelyn was already down in the ditch before he finished the sentence. The calf was hot and shaking, and smelled like panic, which she was learning had a very specific smell. She got her hands around its head, the way he'd said, firm, not clutching, and spoke to it the way her mother had spoken to her during bad dreams. Low and steady, and not promising anything except presence. "Easy," she said. "Easy now. You're going to be all right." It wasn't a promise she could keep. She made it anyway. "Ready," Jack said. "Ready." What followed was not graceful. He pulled, and she held, and the calf fought them both with everything it had, which was not much, but was frantic and uncoordinated and made everything harder. Mud. Noise. The mother getting closer, lowing louder. Her arms aching from the effort of holding something that desperately wanted to move the wrong direction. And then it came free. All at once, the way stuck things do when they finally let go. The calf hit solid ground and stood there on 4 unsteady legs, shaking from ears to tail, and then turned toward the mother, and that was that. Crisis over, world continuing. Evelyn sat in the mud at the bottom of the ditch and looked at her ruined dress and her filthy hands and the mud on her face and felt for the first time in 5 days something that was almost like laughter. She didn't laugh, but it was close. Jack was standing at the edge of the ditch, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. "You all right?" he said. "I'm in a ditch," she said. I know, he said. Are you all right? She looked up at him. Does this happen often? More than I'd like. Then you should have mentioned it in your list of duties. He reached a hand down. She looked at it for a moment, the calloused palm, the steadiness of it, and then she took it, and he pulled her out of the ditch with a directness that suggested he was not going to make a scene about it. She stood on solid ground covered in mud, and he handed her his handkerchief without comment. Thank you, she said. You kept your head, he said. That helped. She wiped her hands, handed it back. He waved it off. She kept it. Lunch was late, nearly 2 o'clock, by the time they were both cleaned up enough to sit at a table, and she made it quickly cold cuts and bread, and what was left of the morning's coffee reheated. He ate without complaint. She ate like someone who was remembering day by day that eating was something she was allowed to do. Halfway through the meal, he said without preamble, "Where'd you learn to handle an animal like that?" "Tennessee," she said. "My uncle had a farm. I spent summers there when I was young." "You grew up on a farm?" "Near enough. Not as a worker, just as someone who was nearby when work happened." She paused. "Seems like that counted for something." He nodded slowly like he was filing it away. "What did you do?" he said. "Before." She looked at him across the table. He met her gaze without apology, not prying exactly, just asking a plain question the way plain men did. "I was a school teacher," she said. "In Nashville, for 6 years." Something crossed his face. Not surprise, he didn't seem like a man who let surprise land visibly, but something. "And then," he said. She looked at the bread in her hands. "And then I made a decision that turned out to be a mistake," she said. "And I ended up on a bench in Caldwell Crossing." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to say more than that," he said. "I know," she said. "I wasn't going to." He almost smiled at that. She caught it just at the edge of it, the small, reluctant quality of a man who had gotten out of the habit of smiling and was not entirely sure how to get back into it. She looked away before he noticed she'd seen it. The afternoon passed in work. She finished the saddle blankets, found a pile of shirts in the hall that needed buttons and started on those. He came in for water twice, drank without sitting down, went back out. Normal rhythms, she was starting to realize, for a man who lived in motion. It was near evening when she found it. She had been looking for a larger needle in the hall shelf. The shirts needed stronger thread, and she opened the wrong box. Inside, instead of sewing supplies, there was a single photograph. Faded edges, worn soft with handling. A woman. Young, maybe 25. Dark hair. A smile that had something quietly defiant in it, like she was daring the camera to make her look ordinary. On the back, in handwriting that was not Jack's 3 words. "Always yours." Clara. Evelyn stood very still. Clara. She put the photograph back exactly as she'd found it. Closed the box. Found the larger needle in the next box over. Went back to the shirts and did not think about the photograph. She thought about it every minute for the rest of the evening. Supper was quieter than the night before, which she wouldn't have thought possible. He ate. She ate. The window above the sink let in the last of the summer light, and the sounds of the ranch settling horses whined the particular creak of old wood cooling after a hot day. She cleared the plates. She was almost to the door when he said quietly, "Her name was Clara." She stopped. She turned slowly. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the table, at his hands, at something only he could see in the grain of the wood. "She was my wife," he said. "She died 4 years ago. Fever took her in winter. There was nothing—" He stopped, seemed to choose a different path through it. "There was nothing anybody could do by the time we knew how sick she was." Evelyn stood in the doorway and did not fill the silence. She understood, with a certainty she couldn't have explained, that he was not telling her this because he wanted her response. He was telling her because the house was smaller than 4 years of silence, and sometimes the smallest things, a photograph back in the wrong box, a woman's hand on a wrong shelf, cracked something open, whether you were ready for it or not. "I'm sorry," she said. Just that. Just the 2 words. He nodded once. "I found the box by accident," she said. "I wasn't looking." "I know," he said. "It's fine." She waited another moment, but he didn't say more. So she went to her room and sat on the clean bed in the quiet house and thought about the photograph and the writing on the back and the way a man could keep a whole life compressed into a single box on a shelf and carry it without a word for 4 years and still get up every morning and mend the fence. That was its own kind of strength, she thought. The kind people didn't have a name for. She was reaching to put out the lamp when she heard it. A sound from outside. Not the ranch at night sounds she was getting used to. Something else. Voices. Low and more than one. She went to the window. 2 men on horseback at the edge of the fence line. Not moving. Just watching the house. Her stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. She told herself it was nothing. Travelers. Men who'd lost their way in the dark. But they weren't moving. They were watching. And the smaller of the 2, even at this distance, even in the fading light, was wearing a coat she recognized. A coat, the same dark blue as the one Thomas Hale had worn the day he handed her a train ticket in Nashville and told her with that handwriting at the edges smile that she was going to love her new life. She stood at the window for a long time. Then she went and knocked on Jack's door. He opened it quickly, not like someone asleep, more like someone who had been lying in the dark, waiting for nothing in particular, but alert anyway. The way men who had been alone on land for a long time learned to be. He looked at her face, and whatever he saw there made him go very still. "What is it?" he said, not a question. "There are 2 men at the fence line," she said. Her voice stayed level. She was proud of that. "They're not moving. They're watching the house." He was already reaching for his boots. "How long?" he said. "I don't know. I noticed them just now." He stood. "You saw their faces." "Not clearly." She paused. "One of them is wearing a coat that looks like—" She stopped. He looked at her. "Like someone you know," he said. She pressed her lips together. "Like someone I knew." He was quiet for a second, reading something in what she said and what she didn't say. The same way he'd looked at the crumpled letter in her hand at the station, not asking, but seeing. "Go back to your room," he said. "Lock the door. Don't open it unless it's my voice. Mr. Callahan. Miss Harper." His voice was quiet. Completely quiet. The quietest voice she'd heard yet from a man who didn't waste volume. "I'm not going to argue with you about this. Go to your room." She went. She sat in the dark behind a locked door and listened. She heard his footsteps move through the house, heard the front door open, heard nothing for a long stretch that felt much longer than it was. And then she heard a voice from outside, not Jack's, calling across the yard. "Callahan, we just want the woman. Nobody needs to make trouble here." Her hand went flat against the door. She heard Jack's voice come back level and without a trace of fear. "There's no woman here that belongs to anybody but herself. You're on my land. I'd recommend riding on." A pause. "That's not how her husband sees it." And there it was. The word she had been waiting for like a stone she knew was coming and still flinched from when it hit. Husband. She closed her eyes. Thomas Hale had told her he was a widower. He had told her that in the 3rd letter in that curving handwriting, with the particular conviction of a man saying something he had practiced enough times that he almost believed it himself. He was not a widower. She had crossed 4 states to marry a man who already had a wife, and the wife had apparently sent men to retrieve the woman foolish enough to believe him. She sat with that for exactly as long as she could stand it, which was about 4 seconds, and then she unlocked the door. She walked through the house and opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch before she had fully decided she was going to do it. Jack turned fast, jaw tightening. The two men at the fence line looked at her. The one in the dark blue coat was not Thomas Hale. He was older, heavier, with the flat eyes of someone paid to do unpleasant things without personal investment. "There she is," the man said, not triumphant, just noting. "He's not my husband," Evelyn said. Her voice was clear and even in the night air. "He told me he was widowed. He sent me a train ticket and a letter, and I came here in good faith. Whatever he told you is a lie." The man looked at her the way men who are paid to not care look at inconvenient facts. "Ma'am," he said, "that's between you and Mr. Hale. Our job is to bring you back." "She's not going anywhere." Jack stepped forward. One step. That was all. Just one deliberate step off the porch and into the yard, and the thing that changed was not his expression, not his volume, not anything visible. It was something underneath all of that. Something that reached the two men at the fence in a way that made the horses shift. "I don't know what Hale told you," Jack said, "and I don't much care. But this woman is working my land under wages and protection, and she goes nowhere. She doesn't choose to go. That's not a debate I'm having tonight or any other night." A pause. "You can tell him that, and you can tell him that if he's got a legal claim he can bring a marshal. Otherwise this conversation is done." The two men looked at each other. The one in the blue coat looked at Evelyn one more time, a long measuring look, and then he pulled his horse around. "This ain't finished," he said. "It is for tonight," Jack said. They rode. Evelyn stood on the porch and listened to the hoofbeats until they disappeared into the dark, and the night went back to being just wind and crickets and the sound of the ranch. Then she realized her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her sides and held them there and breathed. Jack came back up the porch steps and stopped beside her. He looked out at the empty fence line for a moment. "You want to tell me what that was about?" he said. She looked straight ahead. "He told me he was a widower," she said. "He wasn't." Jack was quiet. "I didn't know," she said. "I need you to know that I didn't know." "I know you didn't know," he said. She looked at him. "How?" He met her eyes. "Because a woman who knew wouldn't have burned those 3 days on a bench," he said. "She'd have run faster." She held his gaze. And then the shaking in her hands got worse, and she pressed them harder against her sides and looked away. "I need to sit down," she said. "Go inside," he said. "I'll bring water." She went inside. He brought water. She sat at the kitchen table and drank it, and neither of them spoke for a long time, and outside the summer dark pressed against the windows, and somewhere further off, two riders were carrying a message back to a man in Denver who had written her name in handwriting that curved at the edges like it was trying to be gentle. She thought about the woman in that photograph on the shelf. "Always yours. Clara." She thought about what it meant to be left behind by someone who chose you. And she thought very quietly that there were different ways to be left, and that the worst of them was being left by someone who was never really there to begin with. Jack set his cup down and said without looking at her, "They'll come back." "I know," she said. "When they do," he said, "we'll handle it." She looked at him. "We." He said it the way he said most things plainly, without embellishment, without seeming to notice that it was the kind of word that could mean everything depending on who said it and how. "Mr. Callahan," she said quietly, "you didn't sign on for this." He looked at her then. "No," he said. "I signed on for grain and a long drive back." He picked up his cup. Seems the day had other ideas. She didn't have anything to say to that, so she said nothing, and the night held them both in the quiet house, while the summer dark pressed on heavy and close, and somewhere far ahead of them, the kind of trouble that doesn't knock twice was already deciding when to come back. She didn't sleep. She lay on the narrow bed in the clean room and stared at the ceiling, and listened to the ranch breathe around her, the wind, the horses, the occasional creak of old wood, and her mind would not be quiet. It kept going back to the man in the blue coat. The flat professional eyes. The way he'd said her husband like it was a fact he'd been handed and saw no reason to question. Thomas Hale had a wife. She turned that over and over the way you turn something sharp in your hands, knowing it's going to cut you, not quite being able to put it down. 6 months. That was how long she had known him. 6 months of letters that arrived like clockwork, each one a little warmer than the last. Each one building something she had believed in so completely that she had sold her mother's dishes to pay for the last of the journey. 6 months of a man constructing a version of himself designed specifically to fit the shape of what she needed. She had been a school teacher. She was supposed to be smart. She closed her eyes hard. When she opened them again, the window was gray with early light, and somewhere outside, Jack's boots were already on the porch, and the day was starting without asking anyone's permission. She got up, dressed, went to the kitchen. He was already there, standing at the stove with his back to her, and he'd started the coffee himself. He didn't turn when she came in. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. She took over the stove without discussion. He moved aside without being asked. She cracked eggs. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set hers on the counter beside her. They worked around each other in the small kitchen, the way 2 people do when they have silently negotiated the geography of a shared space, not bumping, not asking, just moving in the gaps the other person left. It occurred to her, cracking the 3rd egg, that she had never had that with Thomas Hale. In 6 months of letters, she had imagined their life together in great detail, and in none of those imaginings had she thought about something as small and real as how 2 people move around each other in a kitchen in the early morning. Maybe that should have told her something. "You didn't sleep," he said. Not a question. "No," she said. "Neither did I," he said. She glanced at him. He was looking out the window over the sink, coffee in hand, watching the yard with the particular attention of a man who had spent the night deciding things. "I've been thinking," he said. "About the men," she said. "About what comes next." He turned from the window. "If Hale sent those 2, he'll send more, or he'll come himself. Men like that don't take no for an answer the first time." He paused. "We need to get ahead of it." "How?" "I'm going into town today," he said. "I know the circuit judge. He passes through Caldwell Crossing every 6 weeks. He's due next week. I want to get a statement in front of him before Hale can frame this his own way." Evelyn put the eggs on plates and carried them to the table. She sat down. "A statement saying what?" she said. "Saying you came here under a fraudulent promise. Saying you didn't know he was married. Saying you owe him nothing and are here of your own free will." He sat across from her. "If we get that on record before he files anything, it changes the shape of whatever he tries to do legally." She looked at him across the table. "You've thought about this a great deal for one night," she said. "I told you I didn't sleep," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Callahan, this is not your problem. These men came for me. Whatever Hale does next will be aimed at me, not at you. You've already done more than Evelyn." It was the first time he had used her given name. She stopped. He set down his fork. He looked at her directly the way he did when something mattered enough to meet straight on. "I understand what you're trying to do," he said. "You're trying to make this small enough that you can carry it alone, so I don't have to be involved." He paused. "I'm telling you that ship has sailed. Those men were at my fence line last night. That makes it my problem whether you want it to be or not." Another pause. "And even if it didn't, I'm not the kind of man who points to a line and says not my side. I never have been." She looked at him. Something in her chest was doing that thing again, that stubborn, unnamed thing that had survived the bench and the hunger and the blue-ribboned woman's look. But it was stronger now. And it was starting to have a shape she recognized. "All right," she said quietly. He picked up his fork. "All right." They finished breakfast. He left for town before 8. She watched the wagon go from the porch and then went back inside and started the work of the day, The shirts, a torn hem on a curtain. She'd noticed the vegetable patch at the side of the house that had been ignored long enough that it was half weeds. She spent 2 hours in that garden. She wasn't sure why she started. It wasn't on any list of duties he'd named, but once she started pulling weeds, she couldn't stop. There was something deeply satisfying about pulling things out by the root, about clearing space, about seeing the shape of something underneath the overgrowth. By mid-morning, she had cleared half the plot. Beneath the weeds, there were still plants scraggily neglected, but alive. Tomatoes, beans, something that might have been squash. She sat back on her heels and looked at it. Clara's garden. She was sure of it. She didn't know why she was sure. Just the same way she'd been sure about the photograph, some combination of the care with which things had once been planted and the completeness of the abandonment since. A woman had made this. And then the woman was gone, and the man had not been able to tend it, and had not been able to pull it up either. She kept working. She was carrying water from the pump to the garden when she heard the horse coming in. Too fast again. Not the steady pace of Jack returning. She set down the bucket and turned, and it was a boy, 16, maybe 17, coming in hard on a piebald horse and pulling up short when he saw her in the yard. "You the woman at the Callahan place?" he said, breathing fast. "I am," she said. "Man in town asked me to ride out," the boy said. "Said to tell you the men who were here last night. They didn't ride out of the county. They're at the Red Creek Inn. Been there since this morning. Asking around about you." He swallowed. Asking about Mr. Callahan, too. His land. His deed. Whether he's got any outstanding debts. The ground tilted slightly under her. Not asking about her. Asking about the land. Thomas Hale was not just trying to retrieve her. He was trying to build a case. Find a pressure point. Find the thing that would make Jack Callahan stand aside. "Who sent you?" she said. "Mr. Briggs at the feed store," the boy said. "He said Mr. Callahan helped him out once when things were tight. Said he figured he owed him." Evelyn looked at the boy for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "Will you wait for a glass of water before you ride back?" "No, ma'am. I ought to get back before they see me gone." He turned the horse and rode. She stood in the yard and made herself breathe slowly and think clearly, which was harder than it should have been, because what she really wanted to do was something she had no outlet for. She went inside and wrote down everything the boy had said on a piece of paper from the hall shelf. She folded it and put it in her apron pocket and went back to the garden and finished watering because the plants needed it and her hands needed something to do. Jack came back at noon. She met him at the door and handed him the folded paper. He read it. His jaw tightened by 1 degree, that small, precise tightening that she was starting to recognize as his version of what other men did with volume and cursing. "Debt," he said, quiet and flat. "Hale's looking for debt." "Does he have anything to find?" she said, not intending it as an accusation, just needing to know. He looked up from the paper. "No," he said. "The land is clear. Paid off the last of it 2 years ago." "He won't find anything." "Men like Hale don't need to find things," he said. "They manufacture them. Buy a debt from someone who claims you owe it, and let a bad judge do the rest." He folded the paper, put it in his coat pocket. "Which is why what I did this morning matters." She looked at him. "I spoke to Tom Garfield," he said. "He's a lawyer, not the judge, but he knows the judge, and he knows how this works. I told him everything." He met her eyes. "Everything, Evelyn. What you told me about Hale, the men last night, the train ticket, the letter, all of it." She felt the exposure of it like a cold draft, everything she had said in the private dark of his kitchen, now written in a lawyer's notes in a town she barely knew. "What did he say?" she said. "He said it's messy," Jack said, "but not hopeless. If Hale's wife is real, and the marriage is documented, then any promise he made you was fraudulent. You can't be compelled to return to a man who deceived you, not legally." A pause. "But Garfield also said Hale needs to have actually filed something which he hasn't yet. Right now it's just two men at an inn asking questions. Two men who will have answers by tomorrow, she said. Yes, he said. So we move faster than they do. They ate lunch standing at the kitchen counter. She hadn't had time to make a proper meal, and he didn't remark on it. And then he said there were things to do on the property he needed help with, and she followed him, and they spent the afternoon doing what needed doing with the efficiency of two people who had been renegotiating their arrangement with every hour that passed, and were both too practical to pretend otherwise. It was near late afternoon when she brought it up. They were at the water trough near the barn, and she was holding a board in place while he hammered the new rail, and she said without planning to, "Did Clara plant the garden?" The hammering stopped. He looked at her over the plank between them. "Yes," he said. "I've been working on it," she said. "I should have asked first. It was presumptuous of me. I can—" "No," he said, quick, like he needed to stop her before she finished. "Don't stop." Then he looked at the hammer in his hand. "It's been 4 years. She would not have wanted it left like that." Evelyn held his gaze for a moment. "She sounds like someone who didn't waste things," she said. Something crossed his face. Not pain exactly. Something older than pain. The face of a man who had made his peace with something, but peace and the absence of grief were not the same. "She wasn't," he said. "She was the least wasteful person I've ever known." He set the hammer down. "She used to say that leaving something untended was the same as letting it die on purpose, even if you didn't mean to." He paused. "She said neglect was just cruelty that was too cowardly to name itself." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "She was right," she said. He picked the hammer back up. "Yes," he said, "she usually was." They finished the rail without speaking, and there was something different in the silence now, not lighter exactly, but more honest, like two people who had acknowledged the full weight of what they were standing in and decided to stand in it together anyway. That evening she made a proper supper: beef and beans and cornbread, and an apple she'd found in the back of the larder that she cut and cooked down in a pan with sugar and a little of the cinnamon she'd found on the shelf. He came in, sat down, and when he tasted the apple, he went very still. She watched him. "Clara used to make this," he said. His voice was entirely steady. "In the fall, when the apples came in." "I'm sorry," she said. "I found it in the larder, and I didn't—" "Don't apologize," he said. "It's good." He took another bite. "It's just—" He stopped. "It's good." She let it be what it was. After dinner, he poured 2 glasses of water and set one in front of her and sat across the table and said, "I want to tell you something." "All right," she said. He looked at his glass. "When Clara died, I told myself I was going to sell this place. I couldn't stand the shape of it without her. Every room was something she'd touched, and every time I walked through I could hear the echo of it." He paused. "I didn't sell it. I don't entirely know why. I told myself it was practical. The land was paid, the cattle were healthy, but the real reason was—" He stopped again. "I think I was afraid that if I left it would mean that all of it, everything she put into this place, would just disappear, like it had never been." Evelyn was very still. "Like no one was left to remember it," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at her water glass. "I know something about that," she said. "When I left Tennessee, when I sold the house and my mother's things and my uncle's land, I told myself it was just property, just objects." She paused. "But it wasn't. It was proof that I had come from somewhere, that people had lived and loved and built something before me." A beat. "When Hale didn't show up at that station, the first thing I felt wasn't heartbreak. It was terror. Because suddenly there was nothing behind me and nothing in front of me, and I was just suspended in the middle." He looked at her. "That's why you stayed on the bench," he said. "Yes," she said. "I didn't have anywhere else to be." "You do now," he said. She looked up. He met her eyes with that straight, unremarkable steadiness, and the simplicity of what he'd said hit her so completely and cleanly that she had nothing to put in front of it. "You do now," he said again. Quiet. Plain. "For as long as you need." She was about to say something she wasn't sure what, something small and careful that wouldn't risk the fragility of the moment when she heard it. Horses. More than 2 this time. 3 at least. Maybe 4. Jack was on his feet before she moved. He went to the window. She was right behind him. 4 riders. Not coming slow and watchful the way the men had come last night. Coming in hard and deliberate, and the one at the front was not wearing a blue coat. He was wearing a gray one. New. Expensive. The kind of coat that announced itself. Jack said nothing for a second, just looked. And then very quietly, "That's Hale." Evelyn felt every muscle in her body go rigid. She had not seen Thomas Hale in 6 months. She had last seen him on a street in Nashville when he handed her an envelope and told her this was the beginning of everything she deserved. He looked exactly the same. She didn't know why she expected otherwise. Men like that didn't show the damage they caused. They just kept looking exactly the same. "Don't go out," Jack said. "He came here for me," she said. "I know," he said. "And you're going to let me handle the first part of this conversation." He turned from the window and looked at her. "I need you to trust me for about 5 minutes." "Why 5 minutes?" she said. "Because that's how long before Hale loses his patience and I lose mine." He walked to the door. He opened it and stepped onto the porch, and she heard his voice go out into the evening level and without heat. "Hale, this is private land. You're trespassing." And she heard Thomas Hale's voice for the first time in half a year, and it was exactly what she remembered, warm and controlled, and just slightly too reasonable, the voice of a man who had practiced being convincing so long that he couldn't hear himself anymore. "Jack Callahan," Hale said. "I don't have any quarrel with you. I just want my wife." "She's not your wife," Jack said. "She's my employee, and unless you have a legal document that says different, she stays." "Well now," Hale said, and she could hear the smile in it, the particular smile she had once found charming, and now understood as something else entirely. "That's an interesting position for a man with a rather significant debt to the Territorial Bank." A silence. Evelyn gripped the wall beside the window. "I don't have a debt to the Territorial Bank," Jack said. "You do as of this morning," Hale said pleasantly. "Bill Sutton signed an affidavit that you borrowed against this land in 1879 and never repaid. Bill's got the paperwork, and I've got a county sheriff who's willing to take a look." A pause. "Now, I don't want your land, Callahan. I want what belongs to me. You hand her over and all of this goes away." There it was, manufactured just like Jack had said. A debt that didn't exist until a man with enough money decided it did. And she understood something then, something that settled through her with the cold clarity of water from the pump. She understood that if she stayed behind that door, Jack Callahan was going to lose his land. The land Clara had planted a garden in. The land he had kept because leaving it would mean everything she'd built had simply disappeared. He would lose it because of her. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch. She felt Jack go still beside her. She did not look at him. She looked at Thomas Hale. He was exactly as handsome as she remembered, exactly as polished, sitting his horse with that easy authority of a man who had never once in his life doubted his own right to take things. He looked at her and smiled. "Evelyn," he said, warm, proprietorial, "I've come a long way." "I know you have," she said. Her voice came out steady. She would think about that later, how it came out steady. "You shouldn't have." "Darling." "Don't," she said. "Don't call me that. Don't use that voice." She held his gaze from the porch and didn't move. "You told me you were widowed. You sent me a ticket and told me to come build a life with you. You told me that in writing, 6 months of letters. I have every one of them." She paused. And your wife, your actual wife, does she know where you are right now?" Something flickered in his face, not shame. Men like Hale didn't do shame, but calculation, recalibration. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "Tell me her name," Evelyn said. "Your wife. If this is a misunderstanding, tell me her name." He said nothing. "Her name is Margaret," said one of the riders behind him. Not the man in the blue coat. A younger man sitting slightly apart from the others who looked profoundly uncomfortable. "Her name is Margaret Hale, and she's been in Denver this whole time and she doesn't know he's here." Hale turned in the saddle. "Shut your mouth, Roberts." "I've been riding for this man for 3 years," Roberts said, and his voice was shaking slightly, but he didn't stop. "I'm not going to sit here while he stopped, looked at Evelyn. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry you got caught up in this." Evelyn looked at the young man for a moment. "Thank you," she said quietly. Hale's jaw had gone hard. He looked at Jack. "The debt stands," he said. "You'll have a marshal on your door in 48 hours. Then I'll have my lawyer in front of the circuit judge in 24, Jack said. His voice had not changed at all, not 1 degree of heat, not 1 degree of wavering. "Bring your affidavit, I'll bring mine. And Miss Harper will bring 6 months of letters written in your hand. We'll let the judge decide who's lying." A long moment passed. Thomas Hale sat his horse and looked at the porch, and Evelyn watched him make the calculation. The odds, the costs, the risk of a judge reading those letters in open court, while his wife waited at home in Denver. Then he pulled his horse around without a word. The other riders followed. Roberts was the last. He looked at Evelyn once more before he turned. "He's not going to stop," Roberts said. "He doesn't like losing." "I know," she said. "Thank you for what you said." The young man nodded once and rode. The yard went quiet. Evelyn stood on the porch and did not move until the sound of hooves had faded completely. Then she let out a breath that felt like she had been holding it since Nashville. Jack stood beside her. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then he said, "You said you had the letters." "Everyone," she said. "Where are they?" She looked at him. "In my carpet bag. In my room. I kept them because—" She stopped. "I don't know why I kept them. I should have burned them." "Don't burn them," he said. "Not yet." She looked at him. He looked back. "You said you had them and you were ready to use them," he said. "That was brave." "That was desperation," she said. "Sometimes they look the same," he said. She almost laughed. Not quite, but close, closer than she'd been since before the bench. She turned and went inside, and he followed, and the house closed around them both, warm and quiet, and still standing, and outside the summer dark, settled over the ranch, and whatever was coming next was still out there, taking its time, but for one more night, it had not arrived. She sat at the kitchen table. He put the coffee on. And they stayed up late into the night planning, because the kind of trouble that manufactures debts and rides in from Denver does not give you the luxury of sleeping. But this time, at least, she was not alone while she faced it. They didn't sleep that night at all. Not really. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with Jack's lamp between them and spread every letter Thomas Hale had ever written her across the worn wood, all 14 of them in chronological order, the way a school teacher organizes evidence, and they read through them together until the small hours of the morning, while the summer dark pressed against the windows and the ranch slept around them like it didn't know what was coming. She had not read them since the station. That was the hardest part. Not the words themselves, she'd had those memorized since Nashville, but seeing them again in the lamplight with another person sitting across from her reading quietly, face unreadable. The intimacy of someone else seeing the thing that had broken her. The particular exposure of letting a man who said nothing read a dead man's promises, because that was what they were, promises from a version of Thomas Hale that had never existed. Jack finished the last letter and set it flat on the table with the same care he'd set the others, and for a moment, he just looked at them. All 14, arranged in order. "He's careful," he said. "Yes," she said. He never says anything specific. Nothing about marriage. Nothing about when or where. Just, he touched the edge of the third letter. Implication. Feeling. Things a lawyer could argue meant something else. I know, she said. But the ticket, he said. He sent you the ticket. That's physical. That's documented. He could say he sent it as a courtesy, that he was helping a woman he knew relocate. She'd already thought this through alone in the dark at the station bench, and in the 3 days since. He's done this before, Jack. I can feel it in how clean the letters are. How careful. He's had practice. It was the first time she'd used his given name. Neither of them remarked on it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Roberts." She looked up. "The young man who spoke tonight," Jack said. "He said he'd been writing for Hale 3 years. If Hale has done this before, Roberts might know something." He paused. He also looked like a man who was tired of what he knew. Evelyn thought about the young writer's voice, shaking slightly, but not stopping. The look he'd given her before he turned away. "He came here with Hale," she said. "He could be playing both sides." "He could be," Jack said. "Or he could be a 20-year-old who hired on for ranch work and ended up in something he doesn't know how to get out of." He looked at her. "You were a school teacher. You know the difference between a dishonest person and a person who's been put in a dishonest position." She held his gaze. "Yes," she said slowly. "I do." "Then we need to find Roberts before Hale rides out of the county." She looked at the letters on the table. 14 careful, devastating, exquisitely constructed letters. "All right," she said. "How?" he told her. By 7 the next morning, Evelyn was in Caldwell Crossing, for the first time since Jack had pulled her off that bench, sitting in the front room of Tom Garfield's law office with her 14 letters in her lap, and her hands folded on top of them to keep them steady. Garfield was a small, dry man with wire-rimmed glasses, and the methodical focus of someone who had spent 30 years turning chaos into documents. He read each letter twice. He asked 3 questions. He made notes in a hand so cramped it looked like shorthand for a language she didn't know. Then he set his pen down and looked at her. "These alone won't convict him of fraud," he said. "He's too careful. But combined with testimony, and if we can get someone who rode with him to speak on record..." He paused. "It changes things considerably." "We're working on the testimony," she said. "How solid?" "I don't know yet." Garfield studied her over his glasses. "Miss Harper, I want to be honest with you. Hale's debt claim against Callahan is almost certainly fabricated. Bill Sutton has a reputation for selling his signature to the highest bidder, and Hale has money. But a fabricated debt with a sympathetic sheriff can still delay things. Complicate things, make things expensive." He paused. "The best outcome is the judge dismisses it immediately. The second best is it drags out long enough to hurt Callahan, even if he wins." "I understand," she said. "Do you..." He looked at her carefully. "Because what I'm describing means that staying at that ranch and fighting this might cost Jack Callahan time and legal fees, and his reputation with some people in this town, regardless of outcome." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not saying he shouldn't fight it. I'm saying you should know what you're asking him to absorb." She sat with that for a moment. "He knows," she said. "He's the one who told me to come to you." Garfield looked at her for another second, and then something in his face settled. "All right," he said. "Leave me the letters. I need them back." "You'll have them back. I'm making copies." He picked up the first one again. "Come back at noon." She stood. She was almost to the door when Garfield said, without looking up from the letter, "Jack Callahan is a good man, Miss Harper. He's been alone out on that ranch since Clara died, and I don't think he's had one easy day of it. Not one." He paused. "Whatever you think you owe him for pulling you off that bench, you don't. He didn't do it to collect. He's not built that way." He looked up. "But whatever you might give him freely, that's a different conversation." She looked at the lawyer for a moment. "Thank you, Mr. Garfield," she said. She went back out into the summer morning. She found Roberts at the Red Creek Inn. Jack had been right. The young man was sitting alone at a corner table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him, and the look of someone who hadn't slept either and was not happy about what he'd been awake with. She sat down across from him without asking. He looked up sharply, then recognized her, and went still. "Miss Harper," he said. "Mr. Roberts," she said. "I need 5 minutes." He looked around the room. "You shouldn't be here. If Hale sees—" "Hale rode out this morning," she said. "Back to town. I watched him go from the road." She paused. "You didn't go with him?" Roberts looked at his coffee cup. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't." "Because of what you said last night." He was quiet for a long moment. "I've been riding for that man 3 years," he said. "When I hired on, I thought he was a rancher. Big operation, good money, legitimate." He turned the cup in his hands. "Took me about 8 months to figure out that the money was legitimate, but the man wasn't." He looked up. "He's done this before. The woman thing. Different woman. Different town. 3 years ago. She was a widow in Colorado. He strung her along for 4 months and took everything she had when she came out to meet him." Evelyn felt the air go out of the room. "What happened to her?" she said. "She went back to her sister's," Roberts said. "She was lucky. She had a sister." He held her gaze. "You were sitting on a bench with 11 cents. She breathed. "Will you testify to what you just told me?" she said. "In front of a circuit judge." Roberts looked at the table. "If I do that," he said, "Hale will make sure I never work in this territory again. If you don't," she said, "he'll do this to someone else, someone who doesn't have a Jack Callahan to pull them off the bench." Roberts was quiet for a long time. She waited. He looked like a young man doing the math on his conscience, adding up what it cost and what it was worth, and finding that the numbers didn't come out clean either way. "There's a woman in Colorado," he said finally. "Her name is Agnes Boone. She's the widow I told you about. I know where she is. If she'd testify to, can you reach her? I can write to her sister." "Then write today," Evelyn said. "Write today and come to Tom Garfield's office at noon and tell him what you told me." She stood. "And Mr. Roberts, thank you. For last night and for this." He looked up at her. "I'm sorry it took me 3 years," he said. She said nothing to that. Because it was the right thing to say, and also not enough, and both of those things were true at once, and she had run out of energy for making people feel better about how long it took them to do what was right. She left the inn and walked back to Garfield's office. She was back at the ranch by mid-afternoon. Jack came in from the south field. When he heard the wagon, she'd borrowed it from Garfield's yard, and he read her face before she said a word. "Roberts talked," he said. "Roberts talked," she said. "And there's a woman in Colorado. He's done this before, Jack. At least once that Roberts knows of. Probably more." Jack was quiet. She had expected relief, maybe. Or satisfaction, the kind you feel when a strategy begins to work. Instead, he looked at the ground for a moment with the expression of a man absorbing something he'd suspected but hadn't wanted to confirm. "He made a business of it," Jack said. "Yes," she said. He looked up. "How many women sat on how many benches?" It wasn't a question, she knew that, but she answered it anyway. "I don't know," she said. "More than one." Jack turned away for a moment, and she heard him let out a slow breath through his nose, controlled, deliberate. The anger was there. She could see it at the set of his shoulders, the careful stillness of someone keeping something in check. Not for her sake, she realized. For his own. Because men who let their anger run loose in situations like this made mistakes, and Jack Callahan did not strike her as a man who could afford to make mistakes. Garfield thinks we can move faster than Hale expected, she said. Roberts is coming to him at noon. If Agnes Boone in Colorado will write a statement, she will, Jack said. He turned back. A woman who went through that, if someone asks her to help stop it happening again, she will. You sound certain. I am certain, he said. Because you would. She looked at him. He looked back. And the thing in her chest that had started as something unnamed had a shape now clear and undeniable. And she recognized it because she had felt it before once a long time ago, before she had learned to be careful about what she let herself feel. She looked away first. Garfield needs one more thing, she said. He needs a character witness for you. Someone respected in the county who can speak to the land deed and your history here. Judge Matthias, Jack said immediately. He's been in this county 30 years. He knows the land records personally. He knew my father. He paused. He also knew Clara. She looked up. Would he speak for you? He was at her funeral, Jack said quietly. He's come out here every spring since to check on the place. He looked at the house. I think he'd speak for me. Then we need him before the circuit judge arrives. I'll ride to him tomorrow morning, he said. He's 2 hours east. She nodded. Then she went inside and started supper, and the afternoon moved into evening and the ordinary rhythms of the ranch continued, because ordinary things do not stop for crises. Horses need water, fires need wood, people need food. And she had come to understand in the last 4 days that the ordinary things were not interruptions of the real life. They were the real life. Everything else was just what happened while you were living it. She was washing the supper dishes when she heard him come to stand in the kitchen doorway. She didn't turn around. Garfield asked me something this morning, she said. He said I should understand what this is costing you, the legal fees, the time, what people in town might say. She heard Jack shift his weight. Garfield talks too much, he said. He talks the right amount, she said. He wanted me to know what I'm asking you to absorb. You didn't ask, he said. I made a choice. You made a choice when you thought it was one night with 2 men at the fence line, she said. She turned around. This is bigger than that now. Hale has resources and he's vindictive, and he doesn't lose gracefully. You know that. I know that, he said. So I'm asking now, she said. Clearly. Is this still a choice you're making? Because if it isn't, Evelyn? His voice was quiet and final. I've been alone on this ranch for 4 years. I've fixed every fence that broke and tended every animal that got sick, and I've done it without someone to say a word to at the end of the day. He paused. You've been here 5 days. You saved a calf from a ditch, and you cleared Clara's garden, and you sat across from a man who broke you, and you said his name out loud on my porch when you didn't have to. Another pause. Yes, this is still a choice I'm making. She stood at the sink and looked at him. I'm not Clara, she said, because she needed to say it, because the photograph was on the shelf, and the garden was half cleared, and she was cooking in a kitchen that another woman had stood in. I know that, he said. I'm not a replacement for anything, she said. I'm just a woman who ended up here. I know that too, he said. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are. He held her gaze. What you are is enough. She pressed her hands flat against the edge of the sink. Outside, somewhere in the summer dark, a horse moved in the barn, and the wind came through the grass. And the night went on the way nights do indifferent to what people are working up the nerve to say to each other. Then she heard another horse. Not the barn. The road. Coming fast. Jack was at the window in 3 steps. 2 riders, he said. Low and tight. Hale's men. No. He turned. It's Roberts. And someone else. She crossed the kitchen and looked out. Roberts on the piebald horse, and beside him, a woman on a gray mare, older somewhere in her 50s. Traveling clothes, the posture of someone who had ridden hard and wasn't finished being angry about the reason. Who is that? Evelyn said. Jack looked at her. "I don't know," he said. They went to the door. Roberts pulled up in the yard and said before he'd fully stopped, "I know it's late. I'm sorry. But she came on the afternoon stage and I didn't know what else to do." The woman on the gray mare looked at Evelyn with eyes that were tired and certain at the same time. "You're the woman from the bench," the woman said. "Roberts told me about you." "Yes," Evelyn said. "My name is Agnes Boone," the woman said. "I'm from Colorado, and I've been waiting 3 years for someone to give me a reason to say what I know in front of a judge." Evelyn stared at her. "How did you get here so fast?" she said. "Roberts only wrote this morning." "He didn't write," Roberts said. "I rode. I left right after I talked to you, and I rode to Junction City, where she's been staying with her sister, and she rode back with me." He looked somewhere between exhausted and resolved. She didn't need much convincing. Agnes Boone climbed down from the gray mare with the efficiency of someone who had spent considerable time on horseback and looked at Evelyn with the steady eyes of a woman who had put herself back together once and was not going to waste the experience. "He took $4,000 from me," Agnes said. "My husband's life savings. He said it was for the house he was building us. And then his wife showed up at my door and I understood." She paused. "I went to a lawyer. The lawyer said I had no documentation. He said I had nothing but my own word." "The letters," Evelyn said. Agnes looked at her. "He was careful," she said. "Same as with you, I imagine." "Yes," Evelyn said, "but I kept mine." Something moved through Agnes Boone's face. Something between relief and a fury so old it had gone quiet. "Everyone," she said. "Everyone," Evelyn said. Agnes breathed once hard. Then she looked at Jack. "You're Callahan," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Roberts says you're a good man." "Roberts is generous," Jack said. "Roberts is practical," Agnes said. "There's a difference." She looked back at Evelyn. "I can testify to what he did in Colorado. I can speak to his pattern. But I can only stay through the week I've got a business in Junction City that doesn't run itself." "The circuit judge comes next week," Evelyn said. "Wednesday." "Then I'll be here Wednesday," Agnes said. Jack stepped off the porch. "Come inside," he said. "Both of you. You've ridden enough tonight." Agnes looked at the house, then at Evelyn, and something passed between them, something that didn't need language. The recognition of two women who had been handed the same lie by the same man and had ended up against all probability standing in the same yard. "All right," Agnes said. "Lead the way." They went inside, all four of them, and the kitchen that had been built for two held them without complaint, and Evelyn reheated supper, and Jack found a bottle of something he'd been saving for no particular reason and poured 4 glasses, and nobody toasted anything, because there was nothing to celebrate yet. But the shape of it was there. The outline of something that might become a victory if they held together long enough to see it through. Roberts sat at the table and looked years younger than he had at the inn. Agnes Boone sat across from him and looked like a woman who had been carrying a stone for 3 years and had just found a place to set it down temporarily without having to pretend it wasn't heavy. Jack refilled everyone's glass without being asked, and Evelyn stood at the stove and thought about what Garfield had said that morning. About what you ask a person to absorb. About the difference between a debt and a gift. She looked at the four of them at the table, this strange, accidental coalition assembled by one man's greed, and she supposed one woman's refusal to disappear quietly. And she thought, we are going to win this. Not because the law was on their side necessarily, not because the judge would certainly do right, but because Thomas Hale had spent years betting on women who had nobody to stand with them. He had made an error in calculation with this one. She put supper on the table. Jack caught her eye across the kitchen. He gave her the small, reluctant, almost smile that she was starting to understand was his version of everything that mattered. She looked away before she let herself smile back. But she did smile. just not where he could see it. Outside, the summer night pressed on, and Wednesday was 6 days away, and somewhere between here and Denver, Thomas Hale was riding home, believing he had already won. He was wrong. He just didn't know it yet. The 6 days before Wednesday move the way time moves when something large is waiting at the end of it, not slowly exactly, but with a particular weight that made each hour feel deliberate. Agnes Boone slept in the main room on a cot Jack pulled from the barn storage, and she did not complain about it, and she did not make small talk, and Evelyn liked her immediately and completely for both of those things. Roberts rode back to Junction City the morning after he arrived. He had business to settle, he said, and Evelyn understood that to mean he was putting distance between himself and Hale before Wednesday made everything official. He shook Jack's hand before he left. "You didn't have to do any of this," Jack told him. "Yes, I did," Roberts said. "I was just 3 years late doing it." He rode out before sunrise. Agnes watched him go from the porch with her coffee in both hands and said to no one in particular, "That boy is going to be all right." "You think so?" Evelyn said. "People who do the right thing late are better than people who never do it," Agnes said. "In my experience." Evelyn thought about that for the rest of the morning. The days had a structure now, the 4 of them reduced to 3, and then the 3 of them settling into something that looked from the outside almost like a household. Agnes helped in the kitchen without being asked, and did it with the efficiency of a woman who had run her own business and had no patience for doing things twice. Jack came in for meals and said little and worked steadily, and in the evenings he and Agnes would sometimes sit on the porch and talk in low voices about things Evelyn couldn't quite hear from inside, and she didn't try to. She went back to Clara's garden every morning. It was coming back. Slowly, the way things that have been neglected come back, not all at once, not dramatically, but in the stubborn, incremental way of living things that were not quite finished. The tomatoes had fruit on them, small green, not ready. But there. She was kneeling in the dirt Thursday morning when Agnes came and stood at the edge of the garden and looked at what she'd done. "You're staying," Agnes said. Not a question. Evelyn sat back on her heels. "I work here." "That's not what I said." Evelyn looked up at her. Agnes had the particular directness of a woman who had been lied to by an expert and had subsequently lost all tolerance for anything that danced around what it meant. "I don't know what I'm doing," Evelyn said honestly. "Yes, you do," Agnes said. "You just don't know what to call it yet." She looked at the house. "He watches you the way a man watches something he's afraid to want because the last time he wanted something, it was taken from him." She paused. "And you watch him the way a woman watches something she's afraid to trust, because the last time she trusted someone, it cost her everything she had." Evelyn was quiet. "You're both being very careful," Agnes said, "and very stupid." Evelyn almost laughed. "It hasn't even been 2 weeks, she said. "I knew in 4 days, Agnes said, "with my husband. God rest him." She looked back at Evelyn. "Time isn't the variable. You know that." She went back inside. Evelyn stayed in the garden and pulled weeds she didn't need to pull for another 20 minutes because she needed something to do with her hands while she thought about the fact that Agnes Boone was not wrong. She knew it. She had known it since the kitchen, since You Do Now, since the almost smile she hadn't let herself return. She had been carrying it carefully at arm's length, telling herself it was too soon and the situation was too complicated, and she had just come off the worst mistake of her life, and she was not in a position to trust her own judgment. All of that was true, and none of it changed what she knew. She went inside and made lunch, and said nothing about any of it, and Jack came in and ate and said nothing either, and Agnes watched them both over her coffee, with the expression of someone watching a slow-moving weather system that had an obvious destination. Monday brought the first real problem. Jack came in from the east fence at mid-morning, and she knew from the set of him before he said a word. "Sheriff came out," he said. She turned from the stove. "Avery. He's the only sheriff we've got." Jack set his hat on the peg. He had papers from the Territorial Bank. Sutton filed the affidavit formally. The debt is on record. Agnes looked up from the table. How much? She said. $1,200, Jack said, for a loan I never took. The number sat in the kitchen like something with mass. $1,200. In 1883, that was not a number a working rancher kept liquid. It was land. It was years. Garfield, Evelyn said. I'm going to him now, Jack said. I'm coming with you, she said. He looked at her. Evelyn. I'm coming, she said, not loudly, not a challenge, just a statement of fact the way he made statements of fact, and he heard the echo of his own manner in it and said nothing further. Agnes stayed at the ranch. The three of them rode into Caldwell Crossing. Jack, Evelyn, and the weight of $1,200 that didn't exist, and Garfield listened to all of it behind his wire-rimmed glasses with his pen moving steadily. And when Jack finished, Garfield said, Sutton's affidavit is dated Saturday. Hale moved faster than I expected. Can we counter it? Jack said. We can, Garfield said, but the bank has the right to attach the property pending the dispute, which means if the judge doesn't dismiss this Wednesday, if there's any delay, any continuance, they can put a lien on the Callahan land while it's being sorted. Evelyn heard Jack go very still beside her. A lien, he said. It wouldn't mean you lose the land, Garfield said carefully. But it would mean you couldn't sell, couldn't borrow against it, couldn't transfer it. And depending on how long the dispute ran. He paused. Callahan, I want to be honest with you. Hale is trying to tie you up, not defeat you. He wants this to cost enough that you tell Miss Harper to go. The office was very quiet. Evelyn looked at Jack. His jaw was doing that 1-degree tightening. He miscalculated, Jack said. He has so far, Garfield said. But Wednesday has to go cleanly. I need Agnes Boone on the stand. I need Robert's written statement. You said he'd send it. It'll be here tomorrow, Evelyn said. She didn't know that for certain. She believed it. And the letters, Garfield said. I need the originals Wednesday, all 14. You'll have them, she said. Garfield looked at her, and then at Jack, and then back at her. Miss Harper, he said. I told you when you first came in here what this might cost him. I want to ask you something now, and I want an honest answer. All right, she said. If this goes wrong Wednesday, he said, if Hale has a card we haven't seen, and the judge rules against us, are you prepared to leave? To take yourself out of the situation so that Callahan at least doesn't lose his land over this? The question landed the way blunt questions do, without cushion, without apology. She felt Jack turn to look at her. She didn't look at him. She looked at Garfield. I'm prepared to do whatever protects him, she said. But I'm not prepared to let Hale win because I'm afraid. Because the next woman he does this to won't have 14 letters, or an Agnes Boone, or a Jack Callahan. She paused. We win Wednesday. That's the plan. Garfield studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Wednesday, he said. Tuesday night, Roberts' written statement arrived by Ryder from Junction City, 6 pages in a careful, plain hand, detailing 3 years of witnessing Thomas Hale construct and abandon fraudulent courtships across 3 territories. Agnes Boone read it at the kitchen table and then set it down and pressed her hand flat on top of it. He named her, she said. Her voice was very controlled. The Colorado woman. He named me in this. Yes, Evelyn said. Agnes pressed her lips together. Good boy, she said quietly. They sat up late again that night, the 3 of them, the lamp between them and Garfield's copies of the letters, spread on the table alongside Roberts' statement and Agnes's own handwritten account that Garfield had asked her to prepare. At some point, Jack got up and came back with the coffee and refilled all 3 cups without being asked, and Agnes looked at him over her cup and said, You're a good man, Callahan. You've said that, he said. I'll keep saying it until you believe it, she said. Evelyn looked at her coffee. He believes it, she said quietly. He just doesn't think it's remarkable. Jack looked at her. She looked up. And there it was, all of it right there in the space between them, visible to anyone who cared to look, which Agnes Boone very much did. Agnes stood up and said she was going to bed, and she said it with the brisk, unsentimental efficiency of a woman engineering an exit, and she was gone before either of them could say anything. The kitchen was very quiet. "She's not subtle," Jack said. "No," Evelyn said. "She really isn't." He looked at his coffee. She looked at hers. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. They went to their separate rooms, and Evelyn lay on the clean bed in the quiet house and thought about Wednesday, and about Garfield's question, and about Agnes's word staying, and about the way Jack had said "you do now," like it was a simple fact, and not the most significant thing anyone had said to her in years. She did not count the hours until morning. Wednesday arrived without ceremony, the way the most important days always do. The circuit courtroom in Caldwell Crossing was a converted meeting hall that smelled like old wood and dust, and the accumulated weight of other people's disputes. Judge Harlan Briggs was 60 compact, with the economy of movement of someone who had been deciding things for a long time and had no energy left for decoration. He looked at the assembled parties with an expression that suggested he had seen worse and wasn't impressed by better. Thomas Hale sat at one table with a lawyer from Denver, expensive coat practiced confidence, and he looked at Evelyn across the room with the particular expression of a man who has already decided how this ends. She looked back at him without expression. Beside her, Agnes Boone sat with her hands folded and her chin level. On Evelyn's other side, Jack. Behind them, Garfield had arranged himself with the quiet authority of a man who had been doing this in this county for 30 years and knew exactly whose courtroom this really was. Judge Matthias sat in the third row. 70 years old, white-haired, the kind of presence that doesn't need to announce itself. He had ridden 2 hours to be here. When Jack had gone to him, Matthias had said, "I knew your father, I knew your wife, I know this land. I'll be there." He was there. It began. Hale's lawyer went first, smooth, unhurried, presenting the Sutton affidavit like a man laying down a winning hand. $1,200, documented, signed, the property as collateral. Judge Briggs read the affidavit carefully. Then Garfield stood up. He was not smooth. He was not unhurried. He was methodical and relentless, and he laid out Sutton's history of selling his signature with the precision of a man who had been collecting that information for exactly this kind of moment. 3 previous false affidavits. 2 dismissed by this very court. 1 that had resulted in a fine. Hale's lawyer objected. Briggs overruled. Then Garfield put Agnes Boone on the stand. She sat in that chair like she had been waiting for it for 3 years. She told her story without drama, without embellishment, with the flat accuracy of a woman who had rehearsed it privately so many times that it had become clean as bone. Thomas Hale, Colorado. $4,000. The wife at the door. The courtroom was very quiet. Hale's lawyer cross-examined her with the particular aggression of someone trying to find a crack in something that doesn't have one. Agnes answered every question in the same steady voice. There was no crack. Then Garfield read Roberts's statement into the record. Evelyn watched Hale's face during the reading. She watched the smooth confidence shift, not collapse, not yet. Men like Hale didn't collapse publicly, but shift. Recalibrate. She watched him lean toward his lawyer and say something in a low voice, and watched his lawyer's expression do something careful and controlled. Then Garfield put the letters on the table. All 14. He didn't read them all. He read the specific passages, the implication of marriage, the promise of a life, the instruction to sell everything she had and come, and he read them in the flat, even voice of a man letting evidence speak without decoration. When he finished, Hale's lawyer said, "These letters constitute no explicit promise of marriage. Your Honor, my client was corresponding with a woman he knew socially. He sent me a train ticket," Evelyn said. Every head in the room turned. She hadn't planned to speak. Or maybe she had somewhere underneath the planning always known she would. "Miss Harper," Judge Briggs said, "you'll have opportunity." "He sent me a train ticket," she said again clearly, "with my name on it from his hand to a town where he told me he would meet me. I sold my home and my mother's dishes and my uncle's land, and I came because he told me to come. He did not come. He has a wife in Denver named Margaret who does not know where he is right now." She held the judge's gaze. "I sat on a bench in your town for 3 days, Your Honor. 3 days. Not one person helped me. I had 11 cents. She paused. "I am not here because I was foolish. I am here because a man practiced this deception until he was very good at it, and I want the court to know that Agnes Boone in Colorado and I are not the only ones." The courtroom held its breath. Judge Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Thomas Hale. Hale met the judge's eyes with the expression of a man who has bet on his own charm one too many times and can feel the moment the odds shift. "Mr. Hale," Judge Briggs said, "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Is the debt claimed in this affidavit a legitimate debt?" Hale's lawyer started to stand. "Sir," Briggs said without looking at him, "I asked your client." A silence. Thomas Hale looked at the judge. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at Agnes. He looked at Roberts's statement on the table. He looked at Judge Matthias in the third row. Matthias looked back with 30 years of this county in his eyes. Hale said nothing, which was everything. "I'm dismissing the debt claim," Briggs said. "I'm finding it fraudulent on its face. I'm further noting for the record that Mr. Sutton's affidavit will be referred to the county attorney." He looked at Hale's lawyer. "Your client has no legal claim on Miss Harper. No court in this territory will enforce a promise made under false pretense by a married man." He looked at Hale himself. "I strongly suggest, Mr. Hale, that you go back to Denver and make your peace with your actual wife. And I further suggest that if I see your name in connection with any document in this county again, I will take a personal interest in what it's connected to." He brought down the gavel. It was over. It was over in the space of a single sound, and Evelyn sat very still for a moment because she had prepared for a fight, and the fight was done, and her body did not quite know what to do with that. Agnes Boone put her hand over Evelyn's on the table. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Evelyn looked up. Across the room, Thomas Hale was already in conversation with his lawyer, Low Urgent, and he did not look at her. He would not look at her. She understood that he was already rebuilding whatever story he needed to tell himself, and that the story would not have her in it as anything but a misunderstanding, because men like that did not carry guilt, they carried revision. She let him go. She let the anger go with him. She picked up the 14 letters from the table, put them in her bag, and stood up. Outside the courtroom in the dust and summer heat of Caldwell Crossing, Judge Matthias shook Jack's hand and then turned to Evelyn and said, "Jack's father built that ranch on honest work and honest dealing. It deserved defending." He looked at her steadily. "So did you." She thanked him. He rode away. Garfield shook hands with everyone, said he'd send his bill, and went back to his office with the brisk satisfaction of a man whose work had gone the way work should go. Roberts, who had come after all slipping in at the back of the courtroom during Agnes's testimony without announcing himself, stood at the edge of the boardwalk and looked at Evelyn. "I should have done this 3 years ago," he said. "Yes," she said. "But you did it now." He nodded. Then he offered his hand. She shook it. He walked to his horse and rode west without looking back, and she thought he was going to be all right the same way Agnes had said it, with the simple certainty of someone who recognized a man turning a corner. Agnes stood beside her. "I need to get back to Junction City," Agnes said. "My business won't run itself, and I've been gone long enough." "Agnes." "Don't," Agnes said. She turned and looked at Evelyn with clear, tired, warm eyes. "Don't thank me. We did this together. That's what women do when the system won't." She paused. "Come visit me. When things are settled. I make a very good pie, and I have a lot more to say about Thomas Hale that I didn't get to say in that courtroom." Evelyn laughed. It was a real laugh. It surprised her with how real it was, how it came from somewhere that had been closed off for a long time and opened without warning. Agnes smiled, sharp and satisfied. "There she is," Agnes said quietly. "There's the woman who was on that bench." Then she embraced Evelyn once briefly, the firm embrace of someone who means it and doesn't need to linger to prove it, and she got on her gray mare and rode south, and Evelyn watched her go until she was small on the road and then gone. Jack came to stand beside her. They were alone in the street in the summer heat of the town that had watched her sit on a bench for 3 days and done nothing. And the irony of that was not lost on either of them, and neither of them remarked on it. "Ready to go home," he said. She turned and looked at him. Home. He said it the way he said everything plainly, without seeming to notice the weight it carried. But she was starting to understand that this was not carelessness. Jack Callahan was precise about words. He said what he meant, and he meant what he said, and the word he had chosen was not back to the ranch, or back out there, or any of the other ways he could have said it. He had said home. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." They rode back in the wagon the same way they had ridden out 9 days ago, in silence, the landscape opening around them, the mountains on the horizon like an unfinished sketch. But it was not the same silence. 9 days ago, it had been the silence of two strangers negotiating the geometry of proximity. This was the silence of two people who had run out of things they needed to say and found on the other side of that something quieter and more permanent. About halfway back, she said, "I want to finish the garden." "All right," he said. "And I want to learn to ride properly, not just sit on a horse, actually ride." "I can teach you that," he said. "And I want—" She stopped. He waited. "I want to stop feeling like I'm here on borrowed time," she said. "Like I'm waiting to find out if I get to stay." He was quiet for a moment. "You get to stay," he said. "Jack. Evelyn." He said her name the way he'd started saying it, straightforward. No ceremony, like it fit in his mouth naturally. "I'm going to say something, and I'm only going to say it once because I'm not built for speeches, and you already know this." She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "I don't know what this is yet," he said. "I'm not going to put a name on it before it's ready for a name. But I know that this ranch has been waiting for something for 4 years, and I've been waiting for something for 4 years, and I think we both know that the thing it was waiting for wasn't a hired hand." He paused. "I think Clara would have liked you. I think she would have liked you a great deal. And I think she would have told me to stop being so careful that I miss the thing that's standing right in front of me." Evelyn looked at his profile, at the jaw that tightened one precise degree when something mattered, at the hands on the reins, steady, unhurried, of a man who had held a dying ranch together through grief and isolation, and never once left it untended. "She planted that garden," Evelyn said quietly, "and you couldn't pull it up, even after 4 years, even when it went to weeds." "No," he said, "because leaving it untended was the same as letting it die on purpose," she said. "And you don't do that." "No," he said. "I know," she said. "I've been watching." He looked at her then. Finally. The straight, serious look from across a bench in Caldwell Crossing, but different now. Not the look of a man assessing a problem, but of a man who has already made his peace with the answer. She looked back without flinching. "Thank you," she said, "for stopping." "I was slow," he said. "You stopped," she said. "That's what matters." The ranch came into view around the bend, the gray wood house, the slightly leaning barn, the split-rail fence with its newer sections that hadn't aged to match yet, the pump. And at the side, just visible, the garden half cleared, coming back small green tomatoes on the vine that nobody had touched in 4 years until now. She looked at all of it. And something she had been holding at careful arm's length for 9 days. She finally set down the wariness, The waiting, the braced readiness for the floor to drop out, and she let herself feel what was underneath it. It was not a small thing. She had been a school teacher in Nashville who believed in careful handwriting and keeping promises, and she had sold everything she owned for a lie, and she had sat on a bench in the summer heat of a town that looked right through her, and she had held a stranger's calf in a ditch and cleared a dead woman's garden, and sat up through 3 late nights planning a legal defense with a lawyer and a woman from Colorado, and a 20-year-old who did the right thing a few years too late. And she was here, still here. The wagon stopped. Jack climbed down and came around and offered his hand the same way he had in the ditch present, steady, not making a production of it. She took it and climbed down, and when she was on solid ground, she didn't let go right away. He didn't either. They stood there for a moment in the yard of the ranch that had been waiting, and the summer pressed warm around them, and the horses moved in the barn, and the wind came through the grass, and none of it asked anything of them. "I'll start supper," she said. "I'll get the horses," he said. She let go of his hand. She walked toward the house, and at the door she stopped and looked back at the yard, at the fence, at the man walking unhurried toward the barn, like it was any other evening, like the world had not just rearranged itself into something new. She reached into her bag and took out the 14 letters. She stood there for a moment, holding them. Then she walked to the fire pit at the side of the house, and she burned them. All 14. One by one, until Thomas Hale's careful handwriting was nothing but heat and ash, and a thing that had happened and was finished. She watched the last one go. Then she put her hands in her apron pockets and walked into the house. Her house. She had not come here looking for this. She had come here on a stranger's wagon with 11 cents and a broken carpet bag, and 3 days of a bench she would never forget, looking for nothing more than a roof and fair wages, and the simple right to exist without disappearing. What she had found was something she had no name for yet. But she had time now. She had all the time in the world to find out what to call it. And for the first time since her mother pressed a Bible into her hands at a train station in Tennessee, she believed that completely. She put the coffee on and waited for him to come inside. And he did. He always did.